Hello everybody and welcome back. Today I want to talk to you guys about the 10 most influential books that I have ever read throughout my life. And these are books that really made me who I am today. And why I wanted to do this is because today is my 26th birthday. I'm filming this a few days before my birthday, but I am uploading this on October 17th, and that is my birthday. I wanted to kind of celebrate my birthday by talking to you guys about the books that made me who I am, because I think that that's just fun to reflect and to see what books have shaped your life. So these are not only books that I love and that are favorites, but they're books that truly changed me and made me who I am. So I would love to know what books changed you or made you who you are, so definitely feel free to leave that in a comment. I would love to see what books made you who you are, and now I'm going to tell you about the books that made me who I am. I was going to potentially choose 26 books for 26 years, but I felt like that was too many, and I really wanted to pick a very specific amount, a very specific 10, that they weren't just books that I love, but books that really changed my life. So anyway, without further rambling on, the first book is The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. I'm going to be putting pictures of the books up on here because I am not with all of my books currently. I am in England, I'm not at home, so I'm going to be putting pictures up of these books. So, The Giving Tree was one of the many books that I read when I was a child that helped me develop my reading skills. And The Giving Tree was one specifically that I always returned to. It was one that I loved so much with all of my heart. I loved the illustrations, I loved the message of the story. Even as a young child, I remember reading The Giving Tree and being so moved and impacted by its message and by its story. It's basically about this tree who loves a little boy, and she gives everything, every part of her, to this little boy to make him happy. And that's what I love about children's literature, is these messages are so deep and so moving, and they are presented in a way that children can understand and also be impacted by, as well as the parent. I remember I always read this book with my parents, and I remember that it's one of my mom's favorites, it's one of my dad's favorites. It's a book for all ages, and I love those kinds of books. If you've been here for a good amount of time, you know that I love children's literature that has a very powerful message that can be read and enjoyed by all different kinds of people and all different ages. So I truly feel like I wouldn't be who I am today without this book, and I'm just so grateful that it helped me develop my reading skills and has imparted its message onto me that I have never forgotten. The next book is The Invention of Hugo Cabret by Brian Selznick. This is a fantastic illustrated middle grade novel, and it is the book that showed me what words and pictures can do. So when I was a younger child, when I was developing my reading skills around age 8-ish, 7 to 8 to 9, I wasn't reading as quickly as the other kids in my classes, and I had a really hard time visualizing what I was reading. I loved drawing. I have been an artist my entire life, and I found visual narratives much more easy to understand than written narratives. And so I had to have extra help classes to help develop my reading skills and to get me to read up to my grade level. And my parents and I always laugh because all of my teachers would talk to my parents and say, Carolyn's not reading up to her grade level, make sure you read with her at home and just keep practicing reading with her. And now my job is reading and books and literature, and so I think that that's just amazing, and I think that that's a really big part of why I am who I am and why I love reading so much, is because I just wanted to be good at reading. I wanted to be a good reader. I loved stories. I loved narrative images, so I wanted to understand the written narratives. Anyway, so I was in the library one day and I saw the spine of The Invention of Hugo Cabret, and I was so taken by it because it's a beautiful pencil drawing of the main character Hugo's eye. It's like this portion of his face, and it was a really thick book, and I took it off of the shelf and I thought, why are you picking this book up? Like, this is huge. You can't even read like a small little chapter book without struggling a lot. but I picked it up anyway because I was so intrigued by the title and the spine, and I looked through it, and half of the book, or even more than half of the book, is told through narrative illustrations, and I was floored. I was just like in disbelief because it showed me that you can have words and pictures working together to help you not only understand the narrative but enjoy the narrative, present a story in a new way. And so I owe so much to Brian Selznick and so much to this book. It's one of the books that made me want to be an illustrator and to hopefully eventually help children the way that he helped me, and to also just impart a love of literature and a love of words and pictures. So this book truly means so much to me. The third book is The Giver by Lois Lowry. It is the first book in a series of 4 books. So it is a quartet. The first book is The Giver, the second book is Gathering Blue, the third book is Messenger, and the fourth book is Sun. But I first read The Giver when I was in middle school, during the time that I was really struggling to read as fast as the other kids my age. And I remember reading the book and discussing it in my middle school class. I think it was 8th grade. It was 7th or 8th grade. I don't remember exactly. And I remember really enjoying the concept. Whenever we talked about it in class, I was like, this is such an interesting idea because it is a dystopian novel, and it was the first dystopian novel that I read, and I thought that it was fascinating. But I was really struggling with it, so I remember finishing it and still not really grasping the entire idea, the entire plot. And I told myself I want to read this when I'm older and when I can understand it more. So my first year of college was when I really got into reading more for enjoyment and more for fun, and I decided to pick up The Giver. And I am so glad that I did because it really sparked my love of reading and also my love of rereading. I think that it's so important to reread the books that you read when you were younger, even if you liked or disliked them, because you will have such a different perspective on them. So The Giver is the first book, and then I read it and fell in love with it. The Giver, because it's a dystopian, I feel like I don't want to tell you too much of what it's about, but it has a lot to do with sameness and the beauty of individuality, and also the importance of memories and a community. I don't want to say too much, but anyway, and then I decided to read the rest of the quartet, and I fell in love with every single book in that series, and it became an all-time favorite, and it made me just fall head over heels in love with reading when I was really starting to get back into reading. I remember reading the fourth book in the quartet called Sun, and I got to the end and I was sobbing, and it was the first book in my whole life, the first novel that made me cry. And I just thought, like, this is what literature can do, like, this is what words can do, and I was so just moved and impacted. I truly feel like that whole reading experience changed my perception and my idea of what stories and literature and reading can do. So I owe so much to this series, and if you haven't read the other books, because I know so many people read The Giver but don't realize that it's the first in a series, so I could not recommend you to read the next 3 books in the series. They are incredible. The fourth book I owe so much to, and that book is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This is the classic that got me into reading classics, and it truly has made me the reader that I am today. I was very intimidated by classic literature because of my history of struggling to read and understand narratives, written narratives, not just illustrated narratives. So when it came to classic literature, I was so interested, and I wanted to read them and enjoy them, and I was so, I guess, impressed by the fact that they were still being printed and read and loved today after so many years. And so I was really impressed by classics, and I was really interested in classic literature, and I just knew that there was something in classic literature that I was meant to read. So I decided to start with Jane Eyre, and it completely changed my life. Jane Eyre is a very approachable classic. I always recommend it for people that are newer to classics and that are intimidated by classics. It is in first-person point of view, so I feel like that point of view, it's a bit easier to grasp because we are just following Jane's perspective as she is an orphan in her childhood, and then she grows up to become a governess, and it's just following her life and her experiences, and it is so beautifully written. I love the Bronte sisters. That really started my love of the Brontes and my love of classics just in general. It's a beautiful, poetic novel. It's gothic and atmospheric, and it's just amazing. It's also perfect for this time of year, so I highly recommend picking it up now if you haven't. But it is just a book that I owe so much to, and I really am the classics reader that I am today because of it. The sixth book I want to tell you about is a book that feels like it's part of my soul and it's part of my identity, and these words just live inside me, and that is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupery. It is a French classic. It is a children's classic, but again, it's one of those children's classics or children's books that are ageless. Its pages are filled with such wisdom and light, and it is a book that has moved me more than I think any book ever has. I just love it. I can't say enough good things about it, and it's one of those books where I can't imagine having never read it. I can't imagine it not existing. I can't imagine a world without it. And if you haven't read it, please, if you get anything out of this video, read The Little Prince. It is unbelievable, and you will never forget it, and it will become, hopefully, part of your soul as well. I also recently learned that The Little Prince is the second most translated book after the Bible. I thought that was incredible. I did not know that. And yes, it is a beloved classic for so many reasons. The eighth book is by one of my favorite authors, and that is And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Fredrik Backman. This is a novella by one of my favorite contemporary authors. He is a Swedish author, and I adore everything that he writes, but I wanted to highlight this novella specifically because it healed so much of my heart. So it is about a grandfather who is suffering from memory loss and how that affects him and his family. My grandfather passed away from dementia, and so between the ages of, I would say, like 10 and 14 was when my grandfather's memory was really starting to get quite bad, and at that age I didn't really know how to cope with that and how to deal with that loss, and he was the first grandparent that I lost, and I, of course, was incredibly impacted by that, and it broke my heart to see him lose his memory and to just experience that with my family. So a really big hole was in my heart because of his memory loss and that experience. And when I read And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer, Fredrik Backman healed that in me, because we're following the story of, like I said, this grandfather who's experiencing memory loss and how that affects his grandson and his son and the rest of his family. And there are scenes with him and his wife who had already passed away. And this novella is so beautiful. Fredrik Backman handles this topic with so much grace and light, and I remember reading it and just completely breaking down in tears and being so thankful that that story existed. That's the beauty of literature, is it can help us deal with things that we don't really know how to deal with on our own, or we don't even know how to begin how to deal with. So I owe so much to Fredrik Backman and so much to this story. Fredrik Backman also is a hilarious writer. This one is a little less hilarious, but I love all of his books, so I just want to highlight the fact that I am the reader I am today because of Fredrik Backman, not just this book, but all of his books. He is just so witty and smart, and he can make you laugh and cry and scream and just feel every emotion in one chapter of one of his stories. And I am so impressed and inspired by his writing and by the way that he can make you feel so many different things, even just on one page or one chapter. So I love Fredrik Backman's work, and this one in particular really helped me heal. So I owe a ton a ton to Fredrik Backman and this book. The 9th book is a book that none of you, if you've been here for any length of time, will be surprised that I am mentioning, and that is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. You all saw this coming. We all saw this coming. So Anna Karenina is my all-time favorite book. It's not just a book, it's an entire world. When you open its first page, it's like being transported into that world. And you are one of the characters. You are in the scenes. You are experiencing the different senses. You are seeing and smelling and tasting and touching everything that Leo Tolstoy is mentioning. In a very strange way that I don't know if I'll be able to articulate properly, Anna Karenina feels like one of the most tangible books I've ever read, which is crazy because the world that I live in, 2024 America, or right now England, is entirely different to 1800s Russia. Like I cannot relate to 1800s Russia, but the things that the characters go through are so human, and they are everyday emotions that we all experience, and it's things that time can't affect. And I think that that's what's so incredible. You are the ultimate observer when you're reading this book, but you are also feeling the things that the characters are feeling. So you are not only an observer, but you are the characters, if that makes any sense. It is just an entire world. This is not just a narrative. This is not just a novel. It's a whole world that I feel so blessed that I was able to read, and it started my love for Russian literature, so I owe everything to Leo Tolstoy. I love Anna Karenina. It's my favorite book. It feels like it's just part of my personality at this point, so I had to mention it because it is part of who I am. The 10th and final book I want to mention is a book that truly has never left me. It is the book that has made me sob my eyes out. Like, I have never cried so hard at reading, while reading a book and after reading a book, than I did when I read this one, and that is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a book that I will always say you should go into knowing nothing about it, so I'm not going to tell you anything about it, just how it moved me to my core. There's not a day that goes by that I am subconsciously thinking about this book and its concept and the things that it talks about, and this book really created my love for, or sparked my love for, not only literary fiction, because I've always loved literary fiction, but for Kazuo Ishiguro's work. He's one of my favorite writers, so I say just read it without knowing anything about it and let it break your heart and also mend it at the same time. And if you have read any of these books, but especially Never Let Me Go, let me know what you think about it. Obviously spoiler free in case other people in the comments want to read it but don't want to be spoiled. So those were the 10 books that have made me who I am today, the most influential books that I have ever read. There are 2 other ones that I want to briefly mention because it feels wrong for me to not mention them. The first one is Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh is the book that I was first read. My parents, when I was a very, very, very small child. My sister is 3 years older than me. They were reading Pooh Bear to her like when I was born. And so they were reading Pooh Bear to me when I was born. And Pooh Bear has been a huge part of my life. Another illustrator that has influenced me so much is E.H. Shepard. He is the illustrator that illustrated Winnie the Pooh. And Winnie the Pooh is just like, again, another part of like my childhood, my soul. It is just ultimate comfort, ultimate nostalgia. I will always love Winnie the Pooh. Sorry if the camera angle moved at all. I had some very chatty Englishmen outside of my window, so I had to stop filming. But the last book that I just want to briefly mention because it feels wrong to not mention it is the Beatrix Potter, The Tales of Peter Rabbit series. This is another book that I read when I was a very small child that really created my love of watercolor illustrations as well as stories about anthropomorphized animals. If you know me, you know I love an animal in a little apron. I love an animal in a little jacket. So I love illustrating and writing about and reading about anthropomorphized animals, as well as just working with watercolor paint. So like I've said about many of these other authors and books, I can't imagine my life without Beatrix Potter's work, so she had to be mentioned. But anyway, that is everything. Those are all of the most influential books that I wanted to tell you guys about today. Again, I would love to know what books have influenced your life and your personality and all of your interests and everything, so feel free to leave that in a comment down below. I am so glad that I can celebrate my birthday through the literature that has impacted me, so thank you guys so much for being here and for always being so lovely and wonderful and supportive, and I will see you very soon in another video. As always, happy reading.